The phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would change everything. I was sitting in my office, staring at quarterly reports that meant nothing, when my husband's voice crackled through the speaker with words that should have destroyed me. "I demolished your house." I laughed. Actually laughed. Not the nervous kind of laughter that bubbles up when your world tilts sideways. This was deeper, darker. The kind of sound that comes from a place where pain has crystallized into something harder than diamond. "Which house, Marcus?" My voice was steady. Too steady. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I could hear his breathing, shallow and quick, the way it got when he realized he'd miscalculated something important. "The old place. Your grandmother's place. The one on Maple Street." My hand tightened around the phone. The building held its breath around me, fluorescent lights humming their mechanical lullaby while my husband waited for me to scream, to cry, to beg him to tell me this was some sick joke. Instead, I smiled. "You demolished it completely?" "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I know how much that place meant to you, but we needed the money and the buyer wanted to start construction immediately. I thought I could handle the sale without bothering you with the details. I know you've been stressed with work and everything, so I just signed the papers and let them tear it down today. I didn't think you'd mind since we talked about selling it eventually. My grandmother's house. The place where I'd spent every summer until I was 16. Where she'd taught me how to braid challah bread and how to spot a liar from across a room. Where she'd whispered secrets into my 10-year-old ears about hiding things where no one would ever think to look. Is it gone completely, Marcus? Foundation and all?" "Well, yeah. They brought in the big machines this morning. It's just a lot now. They're planning to build some modern monstrosity there. Those developers don't care about history or character, but Sarah, I know this is hard to hear, but we really needed that money. The credit cards were getting out of control, and with your job situation being uncertain." My job situation. Right. The job I'd been temporarily suspended from 3 weeks ago while HR investigated allegations of financial misconduct. Allegations that had appeared in my supervisor's inbox the same day I'd confided in my husband about discovering some discrepancies in our joint accounts. "How much did you sell it for?" $80,000. I know it's not what we hoped, but the real estate market in that area has been soft, and the house needed so much work. The foundation alone would have cost us more than we'd have made, and the roof was practically falling in. Really, Sarah, I did the best I could under the circumstances. $80,000. For a house that sat on 2 acres of prime development land in a neighborhood where empty lots were selling for twice that amount. For a house that had been appraised at $250,000 just 6 months ago. I set the phone down gently on my desk and walked to the window. 18 floors below, the city moved in its predictable patterns. Cars following painted lines, people following invisible rules. Everyone staying in their lanes except for the ones who didn't. My husband was still talking when I picked up the phone again. Something about receipts and paperwork, and how he'd handle all the legal details, how I shouldn't worry about anything. "Marcus," I interrupted. "Did you find anything when you cleaned out the house?" "Find anything? Like what? There wasn't much there. Some old furniture that I donated, boxes of papers and photographs I put in storage. Nothing valuable, really. Why?" "Just wondering. You know how sentimental I am about Grandma's things." "Of course, that's why I saved everything I could. The important stuff is safe in the storage unit. We can go through it together when things settle down." The important stuff. If only he knew. I hung up and sat back in my chair, feeling something unfamiliar spreading through my chest. Not the crushing weight I'd been carrying for weeks, wondering if my marriage was built on lies and whether my career was over before it truly began. This was different, lighter. Like the moment when you realize the gun pointed at your head isn't loaded. My grandmother had been many things: a baker, a storyteller, a woman who'd survived the Great Depression by understanding that the most valuable things were often the ones other people couldn't see. She'd also been a woman who trusted banks about as much as she trusted politicians, which is to say, not at all. When I was 12, she'd shown me her hiding place, not told me about it, actually shown me, making me swear on her mother's grave that I'd never breathe a word to another living soul. "Money in banks can disappear," she'd whispered, her arthritic fingers tracing the pattern in the kitchen linoleum. "Paper can burn, But gold, Sarah. Gold buried deep enough stays safe until someone smart enough comes looking for it. The kitchen floor of her house. Specifically, under the loose floorboard beneath the spot where her old Hoosier cabinet had stood for 40 years. Where she'd hidden a coffee tin containing gold coins and jewelry that had belonged to her mother and grandmother. Where she'd added to that collection every year with small purchases, never trusting paper currency to hold its value. A coffee tin that had been sitting under that floorboard for 15 years since her death. A coffee tin I'd never retrieved because the house felt like a shrine, and disturbing her hiding place felt like disturbing her rest. A coffee tin that was now buried under tons of rubble from a demolished house. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "I know this is hard. Let's talk more tonight. Love you." I stared at the message until the words blurred together. Love. Such a simple word for such a complicated lie. Marcus thought he'd sold my grandmother's house out from under me. He thought he'd eliminated what he probably saw as my escape route, my financial independence, my ability to leave him if I ever discovered what I'd already begun to suspect about our finances. What he'd actually done was create the perfect crime scene. Because now, instead of having to sneak into an old house and tear up floorboards without anyone noticing, I had a legitimate reason to demand an excavation of the demolition site. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. Not the family lawyer Marcus and I used for routine things. The other one. The one I'd consulted 3 weeks ago when I'd first noticed that money had been disappearing from our joint accounts. When I'd first started documenting the pattern of withdrawals that coincided with Marcus's business trips, when I'd started building a case that I'd hoped I'd never need. "Jennifer, it's Sarah. I need to talk to you about property law. Specifically, about recovering lost items from demolition sites." "Sarah, what's happened?" "My husband just sold and demolished my grandmother's house, without my consent. And there are things buried on that property, valuable things. Family heirlooms that I need recovered." "Sold it without your consent? Was the property in both your names?" I closed my eyes. This was the part I'd been dreading, the part where my grandmother's old-fashioned ways came back to haunt me. It was in his name. She left it to him in her will, with the understanding that it would always be my sanctuary, a place I could go if I ever needed it. She didn't trust legal documents much, so she handled it as a verbal agreement with him. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Jennifer was calculating the legal realities, the uphill battle, the slim chances of success. "Sarah, if the property was legally his..." "I know. But there are things on that property that belong to me. Things that were hidden there before the property was ever transferred to his name. Things I can prove have been there for over 15 years. "What kind of things?" "Gold, jewelry, family heirlooms with documented provenance. Enough to make a legal fight worthwhile." I could hear Jennifer's pen scratching against paper. She was making notes, calculating billable hours, weighing the merits of a case that would come down to my word against a pile of rubble. "How valuable are we talking?" I thought about the coffee tin. About the gold coins my grandmother had shown me, each one carefully wrapped in tissue paper. About the jewelry that had belonged to 4 generations of women who'd understood that independence came from having something that couldn't be taken away. Conservatively, 60,000, probably more. "And you're certain these items are buried in the demolition rubble?" "Absolutely certain." "All right, I'll make some calls. If we can get the demolition halted and convince a judge that there's probable cause for an excavation, we might have a shot." "But Sarah, this is going to be expensive. And public. Are you prepared for that?" Public. The word hit me like cold water. Public meant explaining to everyone why my husband had sold my family home without telling me. Public meant admitting that my marriage was built on financial deception and broken trust. Public meant airing our dirty laundry in front of neighbors and coworkers and family members who thought we were the perfect couple. I'm prepared. Good. I'll file an emergency injunction first thing in the morning. In the meantime, don't say anything to your husband about this. The less he knows about your plans, the better. After I hung up, I sat in my office until the building emptied around me. The custodial staff came and went. The security guard made his rounds. The city lights twinkled to life beyond my window, and still I sat there, thinking about coffee tins and gold coins and the difference between love and possession. My phone buzzed again, another text from Marcus. Working late? I'll wait up for you. He'd wait up. Like a concerned husband. Like a man who hadn't just destroyed the last physical connection I had to the woman who'd raised me half my childhood. Like a man who hadn't been slowly stealing from our joint accounts while convincing me that my job performance was slipping and maybe I should consider letting him handle more of our financial decisions. I drove home through streets that felt different somehow, sharper, more defined, like the world had been filmed through a dirty lens and someone had finally wiped it clean. Our house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, all manicured lawn and architectural details that Marcus had insisted on when we'd built it 5 years ago. A house designed to impress neighbors and coworkers. A house with no hiding places and no secrets, where everything was visible and accounted for. The garage door opened with its familiar mechanical groan, and I pulled in next to Marcus's BMW. The one he'd bought 6 months ago after his supposed promotion at work. The promotion that had come with a salary increase that somehow never seemed to translate into more money in our accounts. He was waiting in the kitchen when I walked in, still dressed in the expensive suit he'd started wearing lately. Still playing the part of a successful businessman who made thoughtful decisions about property and investments. Sarah, there you are. I was starting to worry. Long day. I can imagine. Listen, I know the news about the house was a shock. I probably should have discussed it with you first, but honestly, I thought you'd be relieved. That place was becoming a burden, and we both knew it needed more work than we could afford. I set my purse on the counter and looked at him. Really looked. When had his eyes become so calculating? When had his smile started looking like something he put on instead of something that came naturally? You're right, it was a burden. Relief flooded his features. I knew you'd understand once you had time to think about it rationally. You're always so emotional about your grandmother's things, but sometimes you have to make practical decisions. Emotional, irrational. How many times had he used those words lately when I'd questioned his choices? When I'd asked about missing money or unexpected expenses? What did you do with the proceeds? Well, most of it went to pay down the credit cards. You know how high those balances had gotten. And there were some fees and commissions, of course. Real estate transactions aren't cheap. But we should have enough left over to take that vacation we've been talking about. A vacation. While I was suspended from work and facing possible criminal charges for financial irregularities that I was beginning to suspect weren't my fault at all. That sounds nice. Doesn't it? Maybe somewhere tropical, somewhere we can relax and reconnect. I feel like we've been drifting apart lately, and I hate that. You mean everything to me, Sarah. You know that, right? He reached for my hand and I let him take it. His skin felt cold despite the warmth of the kitchen. His thumb traced circles on my palm, the same gesture that had once made me melt and now made my skin crawl. I know. Good. Because I've made some mistakes lately, I know that. The job market has been tougher than I expected, and I haven't wanted to worry you with all the details. But things are going to turn around. I can feel it. The job market. Another interesting phrase from a man who claimed to have gotten a promotion and a raise 6 months ago. Marcus, can I ask you something? Anything. Are you happy? The question seemed to catch him off guard. His hand stilled on mine, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Something that might have been guilt or fear or the recognition that his wife wasn't as naive as he'd assumed. What kind of question is that? Of course I'm happy. We're happy, aren't we? I don't know, are we? Sarah, you're scaring me a little. This isn't like you. Is this about the house? Because if you're that upset about it, maybe we can work something out with the new owners. Maybe they'd let you take some photos or... It's not about the house. But it was about the house. It was about the coffee tin full of gold that was buried somewhere under tons of concrete and drywall. It was about the financial independence my grandmother had tried to leave me and the man who'd unknowingly destroyed it while trying to steal everything else. It was about the fact that tomorrow morning, Jennifer would file papers that would stop construction on the lot where my grandmother's house had stood. Papers that would demand an excavation to recover family heirlooms. Papers that would force Marcus to explain why he'd sold property without consulting his wife and why the sale price was so far below market value. Papers that would start a very public unraveling of everything he'd worked so hard to keep hidden. Then what is it about? I looked at my husband across the kitchen island. This man I'd shared a bed with for 7 years and a life with for 9. This man who thought he knew all my secrets while keeping so many of his own. It's about trust. Trust? Do you trust me, Marcus? Of course I trust you. What kind of question is that? And you'd want me to tell you if I discovered something important, something that could change everything? His eyes sharpened, just slightly, but enough for me to notice, enough for me to see the calculation happening behind them. Sarah, you're being awfully cryptic. If there's something you want to tell me, just tell me. I smiled. The same smile I'd been practicing in the mirror for 3 weeks, ever since I'd started documenting his lies. The smile that said I was still the trusting wife he thought he'd married. There's nothing to tell. I'm just tired. It's been a long day. Of course it has. Why don't you take a bath? I'll make dinner. We can watch a movie. Just relax together. That sounds perfect. I kissed his cheek and headed upstairs, feeling his eyes on my back until I disappeared around the corner. In our bedroom, I pulled out the laptop I'd hidden in my closet and opened the encrypted files I'd been building for weeks. Bank statements, credit card bills. A pattern of financial manipulation that painted a very clear picture of a man who'd been systematically stealing from his wife while convincing her she couldn't trust her own perceptions. Tomorrow, when Jennifer filed the emergency injunction, Marcus would learn that his wife wasn't as helpless as he thought. He'd learned that the property sale he thought would eliminate my options had actually created new ones. He'd learned that some secrets, when buried deep enough, stay hidden until someone who knows where to look comes digging. But tonight, I'd play the role he expected. The grieving wife who'd lost her grandmother's house. The confused woman who couldn't quite manage her own finances. The trusting spouse who believed his lies because love made people blind to inconvenient truths. I closed the laptop and headed for the bathroom, where I ran water hot enough to wash away the last traces of who I'd been this morning. When I emerged, I'd be someone new, someone harder. Someone who understood that the most valuable things were often buried where other people would never think to look. Downstairs, Marcus was cooking. I could hear him humming, the satisfied sound of a man who thought he'd successfully eliminated a problem. Who thought he'd destroyed the last evidence of my independence and cleared the path for total financial control. Tomorrow would teach him the difference between demolishing a house and destroying what it protected. Tomorrow would show him that some foundations run deeper than concrete and steel. Tonight, I'd let him enjoy his victory dinner. After all, it might be the last meal he'd eat in this house as a free man. The water was perfect, hot enough to sting, deep enough to disappear into. I sank beneath the surface and held my breath, thinking about coffee tins and gold coins, and the legacy of women who'd understood that survival meant keeping some things buried until the right moment to dig them up. When I surfaced, I was someone new, someone ready to excavate more than just a demolition site, someone ready to unbury all the lies and expose them to the light. Marcus called up the stairs that dinner was ready. His voice was cheerful, domestic, the sound of a man who thought he'd won. I smiled and called back that I'd be right down. After all, we had so much to celebrate. The demolition of my grandmother's house, the recovery of my hidden inheritance, and the beginning of my husband's very public education about the cost of underestimating the women in my family. Some foundations, once exposed, can never be rebuilt. Marcus was about to learn that lesson the hard way. And I was going to enjoy every moment of watching him try to explain why he'd buried his own future under the rubble of his lies. The coffee tin was just the beginning. Tomorrow, we'd start digging up everything.